A sharp, hollow smack echoed through the empty room. On the newly installed security camera, the image was crystal clear. Rob, the veteran shelter worker, suddenly struck the frail, rain-soaked German Shepherd Max across the face. The sound ripped through the silence like a knife, enough to make anyone watching flinch. Max didn't growl. He didn't fight back. Instead, he trembled, his eyes glistening not just with fear, but with something harder to name. Resignation, perhaps. Or maybe a fragile hope that trust could still exist. In the monitoring room, 22-year-old volunteer Jenna froze the files in her hands, slipping to the floor. Her heart pounded, her eyes locked on the screen. With shaking fingers, she replayed the footage and hit record. "Oh my God, what is happening?" she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. That single scene didn't just expose Rob's cruelty. It marked the beginning of a story no one could have predicted. A story where Max, instead of clinging to anger, chose a response so unexpected it would leave the world utterly speechless. The shelter was unusually quiet that morning. Most of the staff were busy in the back, preparing medication and filling out paperwork. Rob moved down the rows of kennels with a metal bucket of dry food, his boots thudding against the concrete. His face carried the same cold expression he always wore, detached, impatient, and distant. Inside his enclosure, Max sat pressed into the corner, his tail tucked tightly under his body. His ribs still showed through his damp coat, his ears flat with unease. Every step Rob took seemed to echo louder in Max's head, each one a warning. Yet the dog didn't bark or growl. He only watched, silent, cautious, waiting. When Rob reached his gate, the camera above caught everything. The man muttered something under his breath, swung the door open, and shoved the food bowl inside with a harsh clatter. Max flinched, but instead of snarling, he simply lowered his head and sat down, quiet and still. In the monitoring room, Jenna stared at the screen again. Her breath caught in her throat. Something inside her shifted. This wasn't just fear in Max's eyes, it was a cry for help, and she knew she couldn't ignore it. Word spread quickly among the staff after Jenna showed the footage. Whispers filled the shelter's hallways, but no one confronted Rob directly. He carried on with his rounds as if nothing had happened, the same cold indifference in his eyes. That afternoon, tension filled the kennel rows. Volunteers glanced nervously toward Max's enclosure, expecting to see the German Shepherd huddled in the corner, too afraid to move. But what happened next left them speechless. When Rob approached again with the empty food bucket, Max did not retreat. He rose slowly to his feet, ears tilted forward, his amber eyes fixed on the man. There was no growl, no bark, no flash of teeth. Instead, Max stepped forward. His movements were cautious but deliberate, as though every ounce of fear was weighed against something stronger, hope. Rob froze when the dog stopped right in front of him. Then, in a gesture no one could have predicted, Max gently pressed his head against Rob's leg. The room seemed to stop breathing. From the corner, Jenna's eyes widened. A lump formed in her throat as she whispered, "Why would he?" The animal behaviorist visiting that day murmured softly, "This isn't obedience. This is trauma and forgiveness." Max, the dog who had been struck and silenced, was not lashing out. He was reaching out, offering a chance for connection where none should have existed. And in that moment, the story of cruelty shifted into something far greater. By the next morning, Jenna's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. What she had uploaded anonymously to a small animal welfare page had exploded overnight. The clip of Rob striking Max, paired with the heart-stopping footage of Max pressing his head gently against the man's leg, had gone viral. Millions watched the contrast unfold. Cruelty answered not with violence, but with quiet, aching forgiveness. Comment sections overflowed with outrage and disbelief. "Fire him," one user demanded. "Justice for Max," wrote another. Yet, alongside the anger came something unexpected: awe. What kind of soul does a dog have to forgive? Like that, news outlets picked it up within hours. Morning shows debated the footage, animal behaviorists weighed in, and hashtags like #JusticeForMax and #DogsTeachUs trended worldwide. Outside the shelter gates, protesters gathered holding signs and chanting for Rob's removal. Donations poured in not for the shelter itself, but for rescue groups and legal aid funds for abused animals. Inside the shelter, the atmosphere had shifted completely. Staff members avoided Rob's gaze, their loyalty shaken by what the world had now seen. Meanwhile, Max became the silent center of it all, the dog who had endured cruelty and responded with grace. His kennel, once ignored, now drew lines of visitors, some in tears, as they pressed their hands against the bars, whispering words of comfort. Jenna watched it all unfold with a mix of pride and fear. Pride that Max's story was finally being heard. Fear of what Rob might do as the world closed in on him. But there was no turning back. Max's act of forgiveness had done more than expose cruelty. It had sparked a movement, and the world was listening. Within 48 hours, the shelter board had no choice but to act. Rob was suspended, immediately escorted out of the building, while angry protesters shouted his name from the gates. For years, his stern demeanor had been tolerated, even excused. But now, with the entire world watching, there was no room left for silence. Local authorities stepped in, launching an official investigation after the footage reached the police department. Animal cruelty charges were filed, not just based on the slap, but on suspicions that Max wasn't the only victim of Rob's harshness. The court date was set, quickly fueled by public pressure and the relentless news coverage that demanded accountability. Rob, once a figure of authority within the shelter, now stood in front of a judge, expressionless. Instead of jail time, however, the court issued a different kind of sentence: 6 months of mandatory therapy, 400 hours of community service, and a half year of supervised volunteer work at a rehabilitation farm for abused animals. It wasn't punishment alone, it was a chance at redemption. Meanwhile, Max's life began to change. Jenna filed official adoption papers, unable to shake the memory of the gentle dog pressing his head against Rob's leg, even after the cruelty. To her, Max wasn't just another rescue, he was family. As the crowds outside the shelter grew quieter and reforms were announced inside, Max finally had a chance to heal. For the first time in months, his eyes held not just fear, but hope. The storm around Rob slowly faded, but Max's story was only beginning. News stations replayed the footage side by side, the cruelty of the slap, followed by the dog's astonishing gesture of forgiveness. Viewers weren't just outraged anymore, they were inspired. Soon, shelters across the country began talking about the Max reforms, using his story as an example of why transparency, compassion, and accountability mattered. Donations poured in not to punish, but to protect animals like him. His quiet resilience had sparked a movement. Jenna, now his official guardian, noticed the change every day. Max's once hollow eyes grew bright. His ribs filled out his coat, regained its shine, and his tail wagged freely. But more than that, he carried a calm presence that touched everyone he met. He was invited to schools, community centers, and even hospitals, not as a victim, but as a teacher. Wearing a simple vest embroidered with the word "Survivor Max," would sit patiently beside children, veterans, and shelter workers, reminding them that healing was possible even after pain. Max had not only survived cruelty, he had transformed it into hope. His story wasn't just about rescue, it was about redemption. True strength is not always shown through force or resistance, but through resilience and compassion. Max, the German Shepherd, endured cruelty, yet chose to respond not with fear or anger, but with forgiveness. His quiet act of pressing his head against the very man who harmed him revealed a truth we often forget. Healing begins where bitterness ends. In life, we all. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is the courage to let go of pain and create space for growth, change, and connection. Max's resilience turned him into a symbol of hope, proving that even the deepest wounds can inspire reform and renewal. In our own struggles, we too can choose to turn pain into purpose.